You've all been riding the train. I'm going to show them the rails.
Do it.
Investing in Quant is a rare opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing. It has massive potential, and so in this video, I will do my best to share with you, in simple words, everything you need to know to make an investment in Quant. I will go through what it is, what it does, and how good of an investment it is. At the end, I will summarize and give it a rating. So, what is Quant? Quant will be for crypto what TCP/IP was for the internet. If you don't know what TCP/IP is, it is one of the key technologies that actually makes the internet possible. Quant is a unique project that is bringing universal interoperability to crypto. But to truly appreciate what this means, you need to understand what interoperability is in the current landscape in crypto. Interoperability is the ability for different hardware and software to exchange and use information freely without any restrictions. Let me give you an example. Alice is sitting at home in California on her Apple iPhone, connected to an AT&T broadband network using a TP-Link Wi-Fi router. Alice opens her Gmail iOS app and sends an email to Bob in the UK. Bob receives Alice's email on Yahoo Mail on his Google Chrome browser. Bob has an Alienware laptop connected to an EE broadband network using an Ethernet cable connected to his Netgear modem. Did you get it? Using the same example again, without interoperability, Alice is sitting at home in California on her Apple iPhone, connected to an Apple broadband network using an Apple Wi-Fi router. Alice opens her Apple Mail iOS app and sends an email to Bob in the UK. Bob receives Alice's email on Apple Mail on his Apple Mail iOS app. Bob also has an Apple iPhone connected to an Apple broadband network using an Apple Wi-Fi router connected to his Apple modem. Do you get it now? Basically, interoperability in crypto is the ability for different blockchains, DLTs, and systems to exchange and use information freely. Okay, but so what? The internet already does this, right? I can already exchange fiat for crypto and send crypto to my wallet, right? Well, not quite. Let me explain. Before the internet was the internet was split into different networks. If you used one network, you could only access files in that same network. So for example, if you were in California, you could only access the network of California. Weird to imagine, right? Each network was built differently, and to access another network, you needed to know how that network actually worked. So, it was not easy to connect networks, and the internet did not actually exist until TCP/IP came along. TCP/IP is simply a common set of rules on how data should be transferred across the internet. This meant that any network, no matter how it was built, could talk to each other as long as the data exchanged followed these common set of rules. It was really only after TCP/IP the internet exploded in adoption. So, where we are today in crypto is where the internet was pre-TCP/IP. Most blockchains and DLTs today do not communicate with each other. They are all mostly split into their own networks. To interoperate with another network, you need to know how both networks work and build adapters between them. This takes time and effort. Let's say you wanted to send Bitcoin to an Ethereum dApp. You can't easily do that. You would first need to exchange Bitcoin for Ethereum on an exchange, do an atomic swap, or use some wrapped form of Bitcoin. In this sense, data and value is not free-flowing. Plus, exchanging Bitcoin to Ethereum is only a very simple example. What if you wanted to build a Polkadot-based car insurance dApp, which uses XLM for payments, Filecoin for storage, IOTA for the car data, and Hyperledger Fabric for internal processes? What if you also needed to connect this app to HSBC, Amazon AWS, or Salesforce? Currently, there is no easy way to do this. Just like the pre-TCP/IP days, you actually need to understand how the different blockchain networks work. You see, each blockchain can possibly have different structures, algorithms, and semantics. This becomes an even more complex problem if you're trying to connect multiple blockchains and non-blockchain databases, which may or may not upgrade or change completely due to a hard fork. You may also have to deal with the mess of different user rights on each blockchain, and also train new developers on this complex system so they understand how all these pieces fit together. The point is, this would be a hard but amazing feat of engineering. This is why you see that most dApps today are simple things like gaming or gambling and are built with only one, maximum 2 blockchains. Now you may be thinking, what about Polkadot? Isn't that built for interoperability? Well, yes and no. We will look at competitors to Quant later in the video. So, to see some really powerful dApps, the mass adoption of blockchain technology really depends on interoperability. Some mass public use cases like CBDCs, supply chains, and digital identity are only possible with interoperability. So, how does Quant achieve it? Quant is unique in that it is not a blockchain, but a blockchain operating system, the first of its kind. This system is called Overledger. Overledger allows you to build multi-blockchain and multi-DLT apps, or MDApps. And not only does it connect blockchains, but it connects legacy database systems. Overledger achieves this by providing a common set of rules. These common set of rules then sorts data into a shared layer that sits above the transaction layer of the connected networks. This separates logic from the transaction layer, allowing more flexibility, rather than trying to directly manipulate the actual blockchain layer. This seems to be very much inspired by TCP/IP. The connected blockchains and databases below this shared layer can then settle transactions by using the shared layer as a common point of reference. The cool thing about this is that it is technology agnostic. It works with any blockchain, DLT, and database as long as the data fed into Overledger follows the common set of rules. Without Overledger, you would need to manipulate the actual blockchain directly, which is a massive technical problem mentioned earlier. Overledger completely bypasses this problem. Another massive advantage of this is that it allows smart contract interoperability, and Quant seems to be the only project which actually addresses this at the moment. You see, most blockchains were originally designed to only support simple asset transfers, such as paying someone in Bitcoin, and most interoperability solutions today only deal with these simple asset transfers. But there needs to be some ability to enforce a smart contract on one blockchain if a condition presents itself on another blockchain. This is hard to do as blockchains generally are not aware of what is happening on another blockchain. Now, with these two features alone, you could already say that Quant is an incredible project, but it doesn't stop there. Overledger even gives smart contract capability to cryptos which do not have smart contracts. For example, you can give Bitcoin smart contracts. This really opens up a world of possibility. You can create nuanced, multi-chain dApps. You can do DeFi with non-smart contract cryptos. You can even connect with non-blockchain systems. Now you may be wondering, how is this all even possible under one project? Even I think this is a little insane, and I'm not even done explaining all the other features yet. But the key here is how much flexibility the shared overlayer provides. Quant has recognized how powerful this is, and it has actually been patented. This means that competitors will have to develop other ways to interoperate, and Quant will be the only project with this unique shared layer architecture. I will not get into the nitty-gritty details of how this technology works, but here is a general overview. For example, let's say you build a simple smart contract for Bitcoin on Overledger. The smart contract has a message which says, Bob pays Y BDC to Charlotte only if Alice pays X Ethereum to Bob. You put this smart contract in your MDApp and put a filter on to look out for Alice pays X Ethereum to Bob in the message layer. When this message is seen by your MDApp through the filter, the smart contract is activated and writes the message, Bob pays Y BDC to Charlotte. This message flows down the layers to the transaction layer. Then, a Bitcoin node appends this message as a transaction to the actual Bitcoin blockchain. This then follows Bitcoin's consensus mechanism and scalability as usual. There you go, you've just given Bitcoin smart contracts and interoperated with Ethereum. This is of course an oversimplification, and it can do a lot more than this, but the general idea is that data and logic flows freely through the various networks via the shared layer. Now, I'm sure you have a ton of questions and doubts like, nodes, I thought QNT was not a blockchain. How centralized is this? Is it even scalable? And if they're setting all the common rules to follow, how can we trust them? Let's go through these step by step. By the way, if you have more questions, leave a comment below. I reply to all comments. So, 2 basic things you should understand before continuing is that all transactions or data on blockchains are hashed. So, only users with the right private key combination can actually understand the data in those hashes. So, Overledger can't actually read the contents of the messages. It just scans the hash of the message and passes it back and forth between the user and network. Overledger in fact takes this a step further and allows MDApp developers to set stricter privacy rules, hiding data from certain users and redacting things, but in a clever way that you actually don't realize some things were hidden. Gilbert, the CEO and founder, also made his career in cybersecurity. He has a really impressive track record, which we'll go through later. Secondly, I mentioned that Overledger adds transactions from the application layer to the blockchain using nodes. So although Overledger is not a blockchain, Quant runs nodes in various blockchains so that Overledger can actually carry out the reading and writing. It's very common to run nodes, and one example would be, if you buy Bitcoin on Coinbase, you are most likely going through a node managed by Coinbase. But nodes can be run by anyone, as long as you have the hardware and expertise. It's kind of like running a server, and the more nodes there are, the more decentralized the blockchain becomes. So, it's actually in your interest to run your own node. But since Overledger runs nodes, when you develop an MDApp on Overledger, you don't have to worry about running your own node. You can use Quant's nodes to process transactions for your MDApp. In this way, Overledger also acts as a node service provider. Node service providers are actually very common in crypto, and it's estimated as much as 60% of all Ethereum apps use a node service provider called Infura. You can think of node service providers being similar to cloud service providers. The only problem with this is that crypto becomes more centralized because of this. Since most people rather not run their own node, they go through node service providers. However, this next feature takes Quant to the next level. This feature alone makes Quant a top 20 project. You see, Quant doesn't only let you use their own nodes, they let you use any node that is listed on the network. And not only blockchain nodes, you can even list DLTs and non-blockchain databases. Quant even lets you open these up to the world or your partners via gateways. You can think of gateways to be kind of like, well, gates. Gateways make your nodes and databases accessible to anyone else who is using Overledger. You can then charge them a fee for using your nodes and databases as a gateway operator. So, let's say you know someone who has a node. You can say, hey, why don't you list it as a node on Overledger and my MDApp will go through your gateway? Or why not use several different nodes and legacy databases for each function on your MDApp? Yes, you can do that on Overledger via gateways. Or let's say you're a massive company with a lot of valuable data. Why not list it as a database on Overledger and open it up to the world via a gateway? So, the Overledger network is the world's first decentralized node service provider. There is nothing like it at the moment. It not only provides decentralization in a heavily centralized area of crypto, but it creates a marketplace for nodes. You could even lend your Quant to a listed gateway and start earning a yield on it. Or why not set up your own gateway and start earning fees from it? Now, let's understand how the Quant token is used and how scalable this project is. Quant is an ERC20 token. For some hearing this, that is a deal breaker, as we know Ethereum is notorious for high fees. But let's break it down, shall we? First off, Quant is blockchain agnostic. We see this in Overledger, and we know Gilbert is open to changing the base protocol to whatever will serve Overledger the best. Second, Ethereum 2.0 upgrades, albeit delayed, are coming, so there is that too. But let's say they don't move away from an ERC20 token standard, and ETH doesn't upgrade to 2.0, then what? Well, let's first understand how Quant tokens are exactly used. So during any Overledger transaction, there are two sets of tokens being manipulated. The first is the tokens of the actual blockchains we're interoperating. The scalability of this follows the scalability of the actual underlying blockchains. So for example, if you're interoperating between Bitcoin and Ethereum, you can put the transaction through Overledger, but you may have to wait for the transactions to be validated and finalized on both the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains. However, on the flip side, if you're interoperating between faster blockchains such as Solana and Hedera Hashgraph, then it will be a lot quicker and will be at the speed of Sol and HBAR. This is fair enough. If Overledger actually sped up the scalability of any blockchain it connects, then I can stop this video here and that would be enough. Now, the second set of tokens are the Quant tokens themselves. Quant tokens are needed to validate each transaction going through Overledger. In this way, they are used to sign and give fingerprints to transactions. This is for security and helps keep the order in the shared layer. Quant tokens are also needed to actually access the Overledger network, similar to how an annual license works. You can think of this being similar to purchasing a Windows OS license. Another example would be paying for an iPhone to access the iOS store, and then paying for apps on the iOS store. So, Quant tokens are needed to do anything on Overledger, creating a demand for Quant tokens. But does being an ERC20 mean this will cause a bottleneck? Well, it might not be an issue. Let me explain. Before using Overledger, all users must purchase an annual license. This includes all developers, enterprise clients, and gateway operators. Overledger licenses are paid for in Quant tokens, and prices will be equivalent to a fixed fiat amount. Now, depending on what type of user you are, the fixed fiat prices are between $99 up to $999 per annual license. The amount of Quant this equates to will then depend on the market exchange rate at the time. A fixed fiat amount makes it easier as users don't have to buy Quant on an exchange. You can just pay for Overledger directly in fiat. Plus, the value of Quant could also fluctuate quite a bit. And if you don't want to pay in fiat, there will be options to pay in crypto. This fiat to Quant conversion is carried out by the Quant treasury, which will be Overledger's dedicated payment processor. With this, it is likely users won't even realize they're using Quant tokens. So, for example, let's say it costs $100 annually. The user would pay $100, and that $100 will be converted to Quant at the market rate, and then that Quant will be used to pay for your annual license. Now, once you get your annual license, those Quant tokens you used will be locked up in what is called a payment channel. Payment channels are a mechanism that allows much greater scalability, like much greater. Transaction speeds on payment channels are only bound by the speed of the internet itself. I could not find an actual number for this, but the reason it is so fast is because transactions made in a payment channel are not actually committed on-chain. Only the first transaction to open the channel and the last transaction to close the channel are on-chain. I won't get into the technicals of how this works, but millions of transactions per second are theoretically possible within a payment channel. So, users pay Overledger through the Quant treasury, which distributes these payments to the rightful MDApp developers, all via the payment channels set up initially. Quant will give developers a choice of using the best business model, so users are not locked into paying monthly app fees. It will be up to the developers to decide, so they can even choose a freemium model if they wanted to. fees are also paid by MDApp developers to gateway operators. MDApp developers pay gateway operators for actually processing their MDApp's transactions through the same Quant treasury and payment channel mechanism mentioned earlier. This is an ingenious way of solving the scalability problem with clever use of payment channels. Therefore, a scalability bottleneck might not actually be an issue, as the only transactions that are happening on-chain only happen once a year when licenses are renewed. By the way, the Quant treasury doesn't take a cut of these fees. Quant earns by increasing the demand for Quant tokens, by giving them massive utility. The Quant tokens then held by Quant themselves appreciate in value. We will go through how much Quant tokens Quant actually holds later in the video. Gateway operators also pay for annual licenses and lock up Quant. The more Quant locked up, the more transactions will flow through their gateway, therefore allowing them to earn more fees. This levels the playing field somewhat, as gateway operators with already built up nodes and databases do not automatically dominate the market. This helps the little guy if they bought into QNT early enough in the project. Now, there are several other features that we unfortunately didn't have time for in this video, but we will briefly go through them here. The MDApp store you can think of being similar to an iOS app store, but for MDApps. Multi-chain oracles give flexibility to use multiple oracles, which are used to retrieve and validate real-world off-chain data. This helps solve the oracle problem. Data and API marketplace you can think of being similar to the node marketplace, but for non-blockchain systems. Least cost routing is a mechanism which automatically switches your gateway to always use the most cost-efficient gateways. Now, ODAP and ISO 20022 we will cover later in the video. By the way, leave a comment below if you would like to see any of these covered in more detail. Now let's answer the last concern. Who sets the common set of rules in Overledger? These common set of rules, or standards, tell Overledger how to refer to the different terms and semantics used in different blockchains. The same mechanism in one network can be structured completely different in another network. So, there needs to be standards which help align everything. For example, the ERC20 token standard is used to create tokens that are transferable throughout the Ethereum ecosystem. So, Quant sets these standards. But why should Quant do it? Well, for one, Overledger is their platform, and it's only fair they set the standards to use it. But let's say each developer is free to create their own standards. As you can imagine, there will be a whole range of different standards for doing the same things, as everyone usually has their own idea on how to do things. Okay, so what if you don't create your own rules and follow someone else's? Whose would you pick, and how would you decide that? And how would you coordinate this across a massive organization with multiple teams of developers across the world? This puts an educational burden on developers and adds unnecessary strain on an already difficult task. Therefore, this requires Quant to build standards, as nobody would pay to use Overledger if it meant the extra headache of getting everybody to follow your standard. Standards also should be strict, as the more strict they are, the more interoperability they provide. It's kind of a weird inverse way to think about it, but if they were not strict, then variations of the same standard could evolve, and then we're back to square one, dealing with multiple different standards and systems. And honestly, there is nobody better than Quant to create these standards. Gilbert Verdian has over 20 years experience in cybersecurity and has worked at some of the most prestigious organizations in the world. He's also an absolute beast. Just look at this. Australia is interesting here because at the time it was one of the leading governments that was exploring blockchain technology. This is around the time he founded the Blockchain ISO Standard Technical Committee 307. ISO is a massive organization of 165 member countries. Its history stems back just to after World War II. Technical Committee 307 is formed of over 50 countries, which come together to develop blockchain standards, where pretty much all ISO member countries follow. This is also around the time he founded Quant. Really interesting timeline, and could it be that he recognized the challenges governments and enterprise users were facing and had the foresight to launch Quant? Nevertheless, Gilbert was talking about interoperability and standards way before anyone else was. Plus, you can imagine all the contacts he has built up from all these top-level roles. There is no doubt Quant will be fully regulatory compliant from the ground up, as Gilbert himself is a regulator. This is key to look out for, as we know that crypto as a whole will be getting more regulated as the market matures. So, we can be confident that risk from regulatory issues will be minimal with Quant going forward. It is one of the few projects we can be really confident about in this area. So, standards and regulations are at the very core of Quant DNA. But another cool thing that shows some real foresight is that after initial standards and Quant gateways are built, Quant takes an open source approach. The initial standards can then be versioned and iterated over time according to community feedback, as well as a variety of community gateways added to the network. This is a really wise move and provides organic ecosystem growth. The nuance of standards and variety of gateways will lead to more complex MDApps, which should in turn drive more gateway operators, users, and developers to the network. The potential of this is absolutely massive. The development of Overledger Network will eventually lead to a three-sided marketplace of users, developers, and gateway operators, with very, very strong network effects. On one side, you have gateway operators listing their nodes on Overledger to earn fees. You also have traditional companies listing their databases on Overledger. Why not list and have a completely new revenue stream? On another side, you have developers who want to build MDApps. Why not use Overledger where interoperability is easier? Plus, you have the added benefit of not having to run your own node. Why not just use the variety of nodes already on Overledger? You can pick and choose what blockchain you'd like. Plus, you can even access traditional off-chain data through multi-chain oracles. Then, for users, why not use the MDApp store, which lists all the different MDApps, which are much more complex thanks to Overledger, making it easier for developers, and then also benefit from cheaper fees, as there are so many different competing gateway operators. Honestly, I don't think I could do this explanation enough justice. It's pretty hard to fully grasp the scale of what it could be. The only issue here is actually getting to this stage. How does Quant first seed the market to get this network effect started? The key would first be a decent number of gateways, followed by a decently high Quant price. If there are no gateways, developers and users would have to pay higher fees to use the MDApps. So, the Overledger network first needs to be seeded with a decent amount of gateways. Then, once that is done, and Quant is locked up in the gateways, the Quant price needs to be high enough so that the fees that new developers and gateway operators can earn is attractive enough to warrant them joining the network in the first place. Then, once there is a good amount of MDApps and gateways, the variety of useful MDApps and competitively priced fees will attract users away from traditional apps. But what are the chances of Quant seeding the market? Why would an enterprise or users use them over other interoperability projects like Polkadot? Let's compare the current competitors to Quant and see which ones are developers most likely to use. We will briefly go through the different interoperability technologies and compare the broad implications of each, while giving examples of projects. For a more in-depth overview, you can watch our interoperability tier list video. Now, in crypto, there exists 7 main technologies used for interoperability. Out of these, 2 are not directly investable, as they are private blockchain projects. There isn't an actual token you can invest in, so we can disregard these. The next are notary schemes, which are basically centralized exchanges like Coinbase or Binance. you have to rely on a central third party to make changes to the blockchain on your behalf. Therefore, we will disregard these as it is centralized. Hash time lock contracts are the technology behind atomic swaps, Uniswap, and the Lightning Network. These mainly deal with asset transfers and are more of a mechanism for trade between two parties without going through a central third party. This isn't free-flowing interoperability in the truest sense, as both parties need to be online and need to agree on the contract in a specified time. Sidechains are other blockchains connected to the main chain. Sidechains can interoperate with other main chains if they are built to do so. They are essentially their own blockchains with their own consensus mechanism and potentially their own native asset. So, this makes them time-consuming and complex to initially build, and each one is only one-to-one with the main chain. So, you may need to build multiple sidechains. Blockchain of blockchains are things like ETH 2.0, Cardano, Polkadot, Solana, Cosmos, Algorand. These allow interoperability between cryptos built with the same architecture, such as Polkadot, Kusama, and Akala. But if you wanted to interoperate with another crypto, let's say EOS, you would still need to build some mechanism or a sidechain to connect to it. For example, the EOS Bifrost Bridge is a sidechain from Polkadot to EOS. So unless your blockchain of blockchain already has a selection of cryptos that fits all your MDApps needs, you would still need to build sidechains. Given that the current blockchain of blockchain ecosystems are still young and are all competing with each other, it becomes hard to decide which one to base your MDApp in. So at some point, you would still need to build sidechains, especially if you plan on interoperating with a private blockchain or DLT. This leaves blockchain agnostic protocols, which is what Overledger and Interledger are. These are easier to use than sidechains, and they can connect with any blockchain since they are blockchain agnostic. Now, all solutions require trusted third parties, but with varying degrees of decentralization and speed. The third party in sidechains are the validator nodes in the sidechain, and for blockchain of blockchains, they are also the nodes. These nodes are generally built up over time, and for both these options, you need to actually know how the underlying blockchains work on an in-depth level. This is why these two options will probably be picked last, as they are complex to build or take time to mature. The third party in blockchain agnostic protocols is also the nodes, or gateways in terms of Overledger. A low amount of nodes here means it will tend to have risk of being centralized and also high fees. However, they are easier to get running. Since they are blockchain agnostic, you don't have to know the underlying blockchains you are connecting on an in-depth level. So the conclusion here is that blockchain agnostic protocols will most likely be used first as they are easier, and then if you have the expertise, you would probably build a dedicated sidechain to replace it as a more robust option. You can think of this being similar to using a cloud service provider first, and then slowly building your own server hardware. Overledger is also uniquely positioned in the market, as it is the only one that deals with smart contract and legacy system interoperability. The other well-known blockchain agnostic protocol, Interledger, only deals with simple asset transfers. In fact, in a recent interview with Gilbert, he notes that he doesn't even see other cryptos as competitors. He mentions organizations like Swift, Temenos, and Fiserv to be more in the market segment they are targeting. The thing is that most banks still use legacy systems, which also need interoperability. So not only is Quant in that market segment, but also will complement and offer interoperability to any system, regardless of whether it is a blockchain or not. So we now know that Overledger is favorably positioned against competitors. The only drawback is that if there's a low amount of gateways or nodes, the network will most likely be expensive and centralized. This brings us back to the challenge Quant has with first seeding the network with a sufficient amount of gateways. The good news is that Quant seems to be already well on their way to doing this. So Quant started in 2015, but already has an impressive collection of partnerships and consortiums it participates in. They are partnered with heavy hitters such as Oracle, Amazon AWS, and SIA, and are members of Hyperledger, Mobi, Interoperability, and Inatbar. But partnerships and consortiums are often loose terms used in crypto. To get a real sense of Quant demand, we need to take a look at where Quant's overledger is actually being used in live production and what real problems it solves. We will only see real demand for Quant if it solves a real problem. Now, because of NDAs, it will take a bit of detective work to find where real solid demand for Quant is coming from. In fact, Gilbert quotes that in 2021, they are already working with more than 300 plus financial institutions, but he doesn't mention who they exactly are. Now, we had a look at all partnerships, and the partnership with SIA really stands out. We found a really interesting timeline. What this timeline suggests is that there's some certainty that overledger is being used to solve a very specific problem for banks. And if what we found is true, then the scale of the SIA partnership could eventually grow to reach all European and UK banks in the mid to long term. And by the way, this does not mean the other partnerships don't mean anything, but NDAs make connecting the dots for the other partnerships take a little longer. We will leave exploring these other partnerships for another video. So what problem is SIA using overledger to solve? Let me introduce you to reconciliation. Reconciliation is a process used to make sure two sets of ledgers are in agreement with each other. Now, when a bank-to-bank transaction happens, the two banks involved have two different views of the transactions, and at the end of the day, both need to agree upon a single shared ledger. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, not quite. Mismatches happen from time to time, as well as double entries. Resolving these mismatches is very time-consuming. It is a back-office operation involving a lot of calling and organizing between employees across different departments, across different banks. But blockchain and DLT is perfect for this. DLT can be used to represent a ledger instead of a traditional database. Blockchains are basically a shared, transparent digital ledger anyway. The different banks can then migrate their legacy databases to blockchains and then use this new system to arrive at a consensus of what transactions actually happened, and then automate the entire thing. This would save a lot of time and money. So this is why in the Italian banking industry, a private blockchain project called Spunta was launched in December 2017. The Spunta DLT was specifically designed for this reconciliation problem, and Spunta was built with the help of, guess who? SIA. Now, SIA is a massive organization. They are the European leader for banking technology. They are basically the backbone for European banking, and you can think of them being similar to SWIFT. Coincidentally, just a month before the Spunta DLT was announced, SIA also partnered with R3. R3 is integral to enterprise blockchain. Just look them up. Their Corda blockchain platform helps financial institutions build private blockchains. So, Spunta was built by SIA with R3's Corda. The idea here is that banks will build their own private DLT instance using the Corda-based Spunta DLT, which will then be used to store data for reconciliation. Then, bank-to-bank reconciliation can be streamlined by getting these private DLT instances in each bank to talk to each other using interoperability. The Spunta proof of concept was launched in 2018 with the aim of testing a full year's worth of transactions from 200 banks. At this point in February 2019, Quant is just getting started and has just joined the Oracle global startup ecosystem. Now, as the year of testing continues, two very interesting events happen. In May 2019, SIA was offered one of the two 10-year tenders by the European Central Bank to build the Eurosystem Single Market Infrastructure Gateway, or ESMIG, the other tender going to SWIFT. This is massive, and ESMIG is basically what all banks must go through in order to process all kinds of payments and settlements in Europe. Then, 1 month later, SIA announced their partnership with Quant. Now, is this in preparation for ESMIG, Or maybe it was to do with the Spunter 1-year test. It's possible that using Corda for interoperability alone didn't cut it, and perhaps SIA looked for a solution. After all, interoperability is needed to migrate their legacy data to Spunter, and they also needed to allow the different DLT instances in each bank to talk to each other. Could it be that Oracle introduced Quant to SIA? It wouldn't be surprising, and in any case, it seems like they needed Quant's overledger. The timeline gets even more interesting from here. In October 2019, the Spunter 1-year test was deemed successful, and SIA began deployment of Spunter to 32 Italian banks in March 2020. 3 months later, in June 2020, Quant became an official fintech partner of Oracle. And then 1 month later, in July 2020, it was announced that SIA had achieved their interoperability targets using Quant's overledger. Then, in October 2020, SIA completed full deployment of Spunter to all the Italian banks. Now at this point, we've connected some dots on the timeline. You could say that this is all just a coincidence, or that overledger was critical for Spunter. In my opinion, it is likely overledger is being used in all Italian banks. If this is the case, then it's likely more banks will use overledger as word of mouth spreads through the banking industry. Italian banks have been seeing low growth recently and probably saw blockchain as a way to cut costs in reconciliation, which would give a much needed boost to profits. The next few events kind of set up Quant to be one of the big players in crypto, but it is less clear what these actually mean for demand. Let's have a look, shall we? In November 2020, it is announced that SIA is definitely selected for the 10-year ESMIC tender. Was Quant also critical in helping SIA win the tender? In that same month, the Open Digital Asset Protocol was announced, or ODAP. ODAP is a joint project between Quant, MIT, Intel, and the US government. The aim for ODAP is to be the BGP for crypto. BGP is an internet protocol which describes how TCP/IP packets of data should be routed throughout the different routers across the internet. So, the speculation here is that overledger gateways are going to effectively be BGP routers for all of crypto. Now, is this really speculation, or was it the good results from the Spunter DLT and Oracle promoting their new partner? It will be really interesting to see how this all plays out. Then, a month later in December 2020, the European Central Bank even appointed those same Italian banks to actually lead the CBDC study for the digital euro. You can really start to imagine the scale of overledger at this point. So we can say that solving reconciliation for banking DLTs could be a route to market for overledger, and a way to seed the overledger network with gateways, because pretty much every bank using SIA will eventually list their node as a gateway. SIA themselves have also been on a rampage in 2021, consolidating power and making big partnerships. They are now working with other massive enterprises like Volanti, Bancomat, and Nexi. Volanti is the leading global provider of cloud payments, serving over 100 institutions in 35 different countries. And Bancomat basically runs all the ATMs in Italy. SIA is also now merged with Nexi, who are part of the European PayTech group. They are the number one in processing card payments and represent 65% of overall European consumption. So, the SIA partnership is even bigger than we thought. By the way, the Italian banks have also mentioned that reconciliation is just the first step. They are also looking to migrate to DLT for other processors. Now add on all the other partnerships and consortiums, which are all massive in their own way. We can see now that Quant is well on their way to network effects. Some other notable partnerships are LACChain, which is a consortium of pretty much every country in Latin America and the Caribbean. Their partnership with Quant has been openly discussed, and Quant is helping them build the Latin American dollar. Gilbert, alongside other directors from Ripple, Barclays Bank, and Electroneum, also founded the Digital Pound Foundation, although no details have been shared on this yet. And Hyperledger, which is a massive consortium of heavy-hitting corporations around the world. They are integrating Overledger into Hyperledger Quilt. Quilt is one of their payment protocols based on interoperability, and Hyperledger actually rebooted Quilt and got Quant to help with it. Could it be that Overledger was so much better than what they had, they needed Quant's help to reboot it? Maybe. And most recently, Hyperledger seems to be also integrating ODAP into Hyperledger Cactus, another interoperability solution. But the spider's web grows even larger with Inatbar. Quant is a founding member of Inatbar, which is a project formed of over 100 large enterprises across the globe. They seek to promote blockchain adoption worldwide by working on different topics and projects. Inatbar is at the core of the ISO 20022 ecosystem. ISO 20022 is a massive sweeping change to the world's payment infrastructure. It is a new updated standard that all banks and payment providers must use to participate in cross-border payments. This ties Quant with various other big companies and projects. The speculation is that Overledger will bridge all of this, but this is yet to be confirmed. And finally, ODAP, as mentioned before, which feeds into Gilbert's grand vision. In interviews with Gilbert, you can see his eyes completely light up when talking about his grand vision. You see, he was one of those OGs back in the early days of the internet, and he talks about Quant Overledger sort of being a homecoming for the internet. You see, the internet grew up without being able to transfer value and money easily. It lacks the security infrastructure, and we've never looked back at why. We kind of just accepted it as it is. But Gilbert noticed this vital part missing and waited for 20 years in cybersecurity until a suitable technology was available, and looks to restore the internet to its true vision of what it was meant to be. So again here, I don't think I could do this explanation of scale enough justice. Just know that Quant is tied up with heavy hitters which plan to make massive sweeping changes globally. Now, after the Overledger network is seeded with some starting gateways, the next thing to get network effects is a high Quant price. Let's look at the supply and demand dynamics to see how the Quant price can rise. Quant tokens have a total fixed supply of 14.6 million, so there will only ever be 14.6 million Quant. This is lower than Bitcoin at 21 million. Initially, there were roughly 24 million Quant, and Quant held an ICO in 2018. Out of this 24 million, 4.7 million were allocated to the company, founders and advisors. This is roughly 20%. This is considered decently low. If we compare this to traditional IPOs, founders alone would hold 15 to 30%. The Quant held by the company should be used for future developments, company reserves, and just generally running the company, although we couldn't find the exact distribution of it. The remaining 19.3 million was sold to the public during the ICO. This is roughly 80%, and out of this, only 9.9 million were purchased. The remaining 9.4 million were burned and gone forever. This leaves us with a total supply of 14.6 million. The current circulating supply is roughly 12 million, and the remaining 2.6 million Quant should still be with the company. So no new supply of Quant can come into the market, other than the remaining 2.6 million held by Quant. So Quant is inherently deflationary, meaning its price will rise over time. However, let's say the remaining 2.6 million is released into the market every year until 2030. This scenario means a potential average inflation rate of 2.2% per year, which would be considered normal. Now, when licenses are renewed annually, the Quant tokens locked in the payment channel will remain locked, and transaction fees will gradually be lower, so there is additional incentive to renew annually. So, the supply of Quant tokens gets locked up as people continually renew licenses. If licenses are not renewed, then the locked Quant tokens will be unlocked and moved back to the Quant treasury to be sold on exchanges. They aren't sent back to the user, and this is a subtle but important point to make. This further incentivizes users to renew, as they won't be receiving any Quant tokens back. if they did receive Quant tokens back, then there is the scenario of people deciding to not renew, so they can claim the Quant tokens to sell at higher prices on exchanges. The price of Quant also doesn't come into the decision of renewing, as licenses and transactions are priced in fixed fiat amounts. So, supply of Quant tokens will only come from people deciding to stop renewing their annual license, or from Quant investors deciding to sell when the price is right. They could also come from future MDApp developers and gateway operators who earn in Quant. Now on the demand side, Quant tokens are needed to use Overledger in the form of annual licenses and to pay for transactions on Overledger. You can really imagine the price of Quant exploding as more and more users renew licenses and lock up Quant. Something like this could happen. The year is 2023. Quant releases the world's first MDApp store. One Quant is now worth $5,000, and the cost to access the App Store is a fixed $100 annually. This means that 0.02 Quant will be locked up per license. The year is now 2024. Overledger grows in popularity, but it still costs $100 annually. However, a lot of Quant has been locked up since last year, so given the shortage, only 0.0 Quant will be locked up per license. One Quant is now worth $10,000. Now imagine this, it is the year 2030. Overledger has reached mass adoption, and it is used in all banks across Europe. It still costs $100 annually, but there is such a shortage of Quant that now only 0.0016 Quant will be locked up per license. One Quant is now worth $60,000. So with this scenario, you can really imagine the price of Quant exploding. And by the way, it only takes into account consumers purchasing licenses. They also need to use Quant to actually use the MDApps. Now add on all the developers, enterprise clients, and gateway operators who also need to buy licenses and use Quant to pay for things. So you can imagine massive supply shortages in this way. Bear in mind, one Quant has 18 decimals, so it seems like there will always be some Quant to allow new users to join. If there is a shortage of Quant and 18 decimal Quant is all that is left to lock up, the price of one Quant will be so astronomically high, it is hard to imagine it will even get to this point. Someone will sell their Quant. So in this way, Quant can be a self-sustaining economy, even only with a 14.6 million total supply. Now calculating fair value for Quant is a challenge, as there is not a whole lot of transaction data to work with. But we can say that demand for Quant will come from the utility of Overledger, and from being a store of value asset. Current utility demand should be coming from those Italian banking partnerships we talked about, and other partnerships such as LackChain. Now we would try to calculate fair value based on utility demand, but the values we found didn't really move the needle a whole lot. We will come back to this when more data is available in another video. But what we can do now is estimate fair value based on Quant being a store value asset. The idea is that Quant will become a valuable commodity to be used to interoperate the Internet of Value. Because of this, people will decide to invest their net worth in Quant as a store of value. We will calculate this using power law distribution, which we learnt about from the valuation framework put out by Susan Athey and Robert Michnick. If you would like to learn more about this, you can check out our undervalued or overvalued video. Now gold has historically been held as a store of value asset, with as much as 5% of the world's value being stored in gold, but it is now down to 2.4%. So if store of value demand picks up, this number could go back up to 5%. But if we say that crypto as a whole succeeds and becomes a new store of value, we can say that it will capture some share of that 5%. For the purposes of this estimation, let's use 2%. By the way, the purpose of this estimation is to build a little perspective of the prices possible with Quant. The calculations and assumptions are very rough, so please take it with a grain of salt.
Now, given that the European Central Bank has appointed those Italian banks to conduct the digital euro study, and other massive partnerships such as ODAP, Oracle, LackChain, and various other banks around the world, we can say that Quant has a somewhat decent chance at becoming a global store of value. If you believe this to be true, then let's say that out of the 2%, Quant has a 30% chance of being one of the few store of value assets. We can assign a future store of value demand of $612 billion. Under these assumptions, we get a current fair value of $20,000 per Quant token. This is with a market cap of $292 billion, which is the size of a large tech company. However, if you don't believe this to be true, let's say there's only a 2% chance it will become a global store of value. Then, fair value for Quant should be about $1,300, with a market cap of roughly $19 billion. And if you're almost certain that Quant won't be a global store of value, then fair value should be about $60, with a market cap of $876 million. Again, these numbers are just to build some ideas of price in your head. The main driver of Quant price will ultimately be Overledger utility. The Spunta project serves as a very good case to use Overledger and can be shown to future Overledger clients. There's no reason why other banks around the world would not use Overledger for their processes, as all banks will always look to increase profits. Cutting costs with DLT is one way of doing that. On top of this, all the common enterprise concerns have even been answered by Quant. Regulatory issues are clear, as using Overledger means you're operating in a fully regulatory compliant ecosystem. Legacy systems can still be used alongside blockchain and slowly migrated with interoperability. Cybersecurity is also Gilbert's life work, and concerns over ROI and costs of training staff to understand complex blockchain technology is minimized, as there's no blockchain lock-in. You always have the option of using another blockchain on Overledger, and developers only need to know the most widely used programming languages. There is literally no stone left unturned with Quant. Now, once utility really kicks in from the banks and community Overledger is released, this should be the very beginning of a Quant price bull run. And it's crazy to imagine this is only the beginning. In a mass adoption scenario, let's say you are certain that Quant will be a global store of value. Then, fair value for Quant should be at least $60,000 right now, purely from store of value demand. But it doesn't stop with just banking. Interoperability is needed everywhere, and Overledger can be virtually used in any market. DLT and blockchain is, after all, a general purpose technology. So, the total addressable market of Quant is, well, everything. As mentioned in the beginning, Quant will be what TCP/IP was for the internet. The scale of this is absolutely massive, and Quant really is a sleeping giant. I don't usually like to make general sweeping statements and say it will connect everything, but this is one project that is criminally undervalued. Quant has a very low market cap for what the project actually is, and all its heavy-hitting partnerships. So although this is not financial advice, I personally would try to get at least 10 Quant and just hodl it. Plus, being a Quant investor means you want other crypto projects to succeed. If crypto as a whole succeeds, then interoperability will no doubt be needed. But for Overledger to grow to the global scale we imagine, there needs to be a whole boatload of developers working on it. We know that consistent developer activity is a sign of a healthy project. So let's take a look at GitHub developer activity on Sandbase. Now, one thing to note when looking at this is that Quant is proprietary technology, meaning it is patented and not open source. So, Quant developers will be the only developers who are working on core Overledger technology. It looks like development activity is slowing down. This could mean one of two things. Either Overledger development is mostly finished and they're going to market, which it seems like they are, or the project is actually not gaining any traction, so they have stopped development on it. I think it is most likely the former. Another key thing to look out for is how easy is it for developers to use the Overledger API and SDK. Overledger allows developers the choice to use the most popular programming languages, JavaScript, Java, and they also plan to add Python and Ruby. So, there's no need to learn a specific blockchain language like Solidity. Plus, the way Overledger works is like hooking up to an API, which all developers will be very familiar with. All that's required to get running is 3 lines of code. The cool thing is that even if you wanted to connect multiple blockchains such as Ethereum, Bitcoin, XRP, and Solana, you don't have to learn how to integrate each. You just need to learn how to use the Overledger SDK and API. This saves a lot of time for developers, as they can just focus on building their app instead of learning different programming concepts. On top of this, it gives developers the choice of not having to run their own node. They can just use the gateways on Overledger. Another thing to look out for is community. Now, Quant is not particularly focused on retail. However, they do have the usual bells and whistles such as Twitter, YouTube, and Telegram. Recently, they also mentioned they would be releasing updates every 2 weeks, so you can go over to their website and see what's happening. And once the community mainnet of OVN is released, I'm certain the community will grow. Now, unlike other projects which have to build their client base from the ground up and incentivize users to use their blockchain, Quant is being marketed by the likes of Oracle, SIA, and Amazon AWS. But will it actually be executed on? Who is the team behind it, and will they actually accomplish this? The company has been hiring a lot recently, increasing by 50% in 2021, and there doesn't seem to be any signs of slowing down. The other directors in the company are also all very solid and have 20 plus years experience in their respective roles. They all either have held high-level positions at large companies or have the experience of running their own business. But specifically, Guy Dietrich, who was an MD at Rockefeller Capital prior to joining the board of directors at Quant. He has over 35 plus years of investment experience and also used to lead the largest private wealth management practice for Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney. There's no doubt he has great contacts for Quant, and I'm sure he advised Quant well. So, to summarize, Quant is a uniquely positioned project with a technology that not only everybody needs, but is patented and is easier to use than competitors. It allows end-to-end interoperability between any DLT and database, and also smart contracts, which no other project does. It will be the world's first decentralized node service provider, MDApp store, and open up new revenue streams for traditional companies. It has a first-mover advantage in terms of blockchain operating systems, standards, and universal interoperability. With big enterprise partners and adoption, everyone will have to use these standards whether they like it or not. It is most likely being used in all Italian banks and has some seriously heavy-hitting partnerships that are on a global scale. It has a founder who is completely plugged into his customers, which are governments and enterprises. It has probably near to zero regulatory risk. The market cap is so low for what it is, you can stand to earn asymmetric gains. So, I would have to give Quant an A+ rating as an investment. Now, let's go through some shortfalls. It is still not 100% clear whether being an ERC20 token is a scalability bottleneck. Yes, there are the payment channels we discussed, but it would probably be better to eventually move to a highly scalable crypto. The NDAs mean price will be low in the short term, as retail investors will generally not pick up on this project. However, it could mean quant investors can pick up more at these lower prices and then benefit from the gains when utility kicks in. It is also not 100% clear how Quant is being used at these enterprises due to the NDAs. The Overledger system is patented but not open source, So it would lack the innovation that a mass public of developers can provide, but maybe it's not necessary. The Quant team is still pretty small for the scale of this project. There needs to be a lot more hiring going on to actually execute on it. Now we know due to the NDAs that information on Quant can be hard to find. So here's a collection of different sources you can use. Dante DeFi for Quant news on YouTube, Dreadbongo, Crypto Nerd, VH and Olivia for news on crypto Twitter, Council of Quant, Jeff on Telegram and also Twitter, and then the amazing SEC documents on Medium. So that's it guys, that's the end of the video. If you stuck to the end, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button and subscribe. I know this video was a bit longer than usual, but Quant had so much fundamental analysis that was so good that I just wanted to include it into one single video for you. I also want to say thanks to everyone who supported me in making this video and all the beautiful nuggets of information you all provided me, especially Bob and Foxderiverpops. You guys were really helpful. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, let me know if you would like me to do these videos into smaller segments. So for example, instead of one video, I would do it in like maybe one video and then another video split in half. So yeah, let me know in the comments below, and yeah, thanks for watching, and